going to talk about going from being a student of Mokuhanga to teaching it, to being a student to teaching it, sort of going back and forth. The role of an artist's residency for someone in academia is invaluable. Not only does it allow a teacher or professor the uninterrupted opportunity to make their own work, it also has the direct effect on their pedagogy and academic career. 2 residencies at MILAB and 1 workshop in Japan have provided me the ability to expand my artistic practice and simultaneously broaden the content of the courses I teach. In this paper, I will discuss the wonderful challenges of teaching Mokuhanga to a young generation of college students, most of whom are not art majors, who seek an opportunity to work with their hands and explore their creativity. Through this cycle of residency to classroom to residency to classroom, I hope to inspire a new generation of Mokuhanga enthusiasts. My first exposure to Mokuhanga was in 2011 when I traveled to Kyoto and Awaji Island for the first IMC conference. A 2-day Mokuhanga workshop with Shoichi Kitamura was offered prior to the start, and I decided to enroll thinking, how hard can this be? As an experienced printmaker and college art professor, I consider myself proficient in all major print processes and consider woodblocks to be a specialty. Looking back, I had no idea how significantly that workshop would change the course of my own art practice and my career as a professor. The 2 days spent with Kitamura-san were eye-opening, to say the least. Differences in paper, tools, ink, registration, and aesthetics challenged me at every turn and exposed new possibilities for my own work and the way I think about printmaking. After that first IMC conference, I returned home and began planning an international Mokuhanga exchange portfolio and exhibition with a colleague, Carol Mathey, at my university. Though the portfolio and exhibition were successful and received great feedback, I did not feel I was proficient enough with Mokuhanga to add it to my teaching portfolio. More training was necessary. In the summer of 2014, I was a resident at MILAB in Kawaguchiko as part of a continuing study program for advanced artists. Under the instruction of Shinkichi Numabe, Mokuhanga fundamentals were reiterated and demonstrated in depth. As I've come to discover since then, every chance to watch someone work in Mokuhanga is a whole new experience, adding immensely to my knowledge of everything from tool sharpening to parent selection to my choice of paper. Working intensely with Mokuhanga for 5 weeks allowed my work to develop far beyond the rudimentary prints I felt I had been making up to that point. After these 2 experiences, the workshop and the residency, I thought it was time to become the teacher of Mokuhanga, so I offered a Mokuhanga course at my college. As I said, I teach at St. Lawrence University. It's a small liberal arts college in upstate New York that offers undergraduate degrees in 3 dozen majors. A requirement of all students is to take an arts course. The most popular course is drawing, and we can never meet student demand for this course, so I decided to offer Mokuhanga through our department and through Asian Studies as an arts distribution. And I did not require a prerequisite for the course. What that meant was any student from the university could take this course regardless of prior art experience. I capped it at 10 students, and the students who took the course came from various fields: chemistry, English, economics, environmental studies, gender studies, and 1 art major. 1 student had taken a beginning printmaking class, a few had taken drawing, but the majority had taken no art courses. The course consisted of 5 projects, broken down into 4 woodcuts and 1 research paper. Because most students had little art experience, I taught at a slower pace than normal, having to introduce basic concepts, design, composition, materials, studio etiquette. The woodcut projects progressed quickly from a black and white self-portrait to the introduction of color via a master study. And for the master study, students could choose any work, either ukiyo-e or contemporary artists. The 3rd project was a color print, working from a photograph they had taken, focusing on the landscape of upstate New York. The final project was an exchange portfolio print that required students to produce an edition of 13. As I said, at my university, I'm very fortunate because we have a wonderful collection of ukiyo-e prints. Though I had planned this course primarily as a studio course, I felt that I could not overlook the history of ukiyo-e and contemporary Mokuhanga. So I asked students to look at prints from the collection on numerous occasions. They selected 1 print and they wrote a short research paper on that print. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by some of the prints that my students produced, but there seemed a lack of focus and integrity in the course. In the fall of 2015, I began teaching in our first year program. This is a commitment of teaching a freshman-only course for 3 years each semester. The past 2 years, in the fall, I co-teach with a poet, and we call the course The Pen and the Knife. We focus on poetry and printmaking. For the spring semester, I redesigned my Mokuhanga course into a seminar course just for first-year students and made it much more focused and intentional. The course is limited to only 10 students and has been much more successful than just the studio course that I offered before. What I lacked in the generic Mokuhanga course, I've made up for in this first-year seminar. One of the required tenets of teaching in this program is a focus on research skills. So this new class has fewer studio projects with equal emphasis on research and writing skills. Using the university's collection, students spend a lot of time looking at original prints, and they write 4 description and analysis papers as well as an 8 to 10 page research paper on ukiyo-e. Other requirements include oral presentations and studio critiques. The studio projects have been more refined and taught with better intentionality with each iteration that I teach this course. This past spring was the most successful version yet. I was fortunate with the 10 students as they were not taking it just for an arts designation, but because they genuinely seemed interested in Japanese printmaking. I introduced students to Mokuhanga with this course with a black and white self-portrait. Working from a photograph, students immediately have to make important decisions about positive and negative space, line versus shape, the reversal of imagery in printmaking, and the diversity of carved marks that they produce. The importance of the Canton registration is slightly lost on them until I add the next component, which is a second layer to the self-portrait. A third of the way through the semester, I introduced a second project, another master study. Students choose an existing ukiyo-e or contemporary print for this project and must do a small amount of research on the artist, the image, the genre. Obviously, their chosen images are complicated and originally had more printed layers than they are capable of reproducing. The objectives of this project are to simplify the image. Think about deconstructing, then reconstructing the image into something that they can manage. Refine their planning and carving. Think about layering colors and improve their printing. These are some examples of their master studies. The final project in this freshman seminar is an exchange portfolio. The theme for the past 2 years, chosen by the students, is centered around spirit animals or inner spirit. Students must produce an original color print in edition of 13. Because students receive copies of everyone else's print, they quickly realize the stakes are high and tend to produce interesting work. The exchange portfolio also opens them to another history of printmaking, the benefits of working in multiples, and the need to control the media and printing. These are examples. This is the third woodcut that they've ever done. This is for the exchange portfolio. This was an overachiever. These are a few others. When I taught this seminar course for the first time, I showed students how to make traditional stab binding for the books, for their prints. This past year, they wanted to learn how to make clamshell boxes. So we spent the final 2 days of the semester making clamshell boxes for their exchange portfolios. In these seminar courses, the students must purchase their own carving tools, a V-gouge, U-gouge, a knife, small brushes, 2 wood blocks, and a student-grade baron. All other materials are provided by the university, various printing papers, watercolor and gouache, other carving tools, printing brushes, and additional woodblocks. Trying to keep the cost of materials affordable for students is always a concern, especially because of the specialization of the materials. Students went through many writing exercises leading up to their research papers. Time was spent looking at ukiyo-e prints from the collection, followed by a written description of one print and an analysis of the same print. This process was repeated, looking at a second selection of ukiyo-e images, write a description, write an analysis. Students then chose one print, or possibly a triptych, on which they wrote a research paper. Visual analysis and description played an important part of their semester. Examples of the prints students wrote about included Hiroshige's Dyer's Quarters in Kanda, his Fujieda transfer from horse to manpower, the triptych of Tokoyuni's The Ghost of Marahachi in Kukuno, and Kogyo's Koi no Omoni. Some of the information that the university has on these prints is very limited, so students did quite a bit of digging throughout archives to find actually more information than the university had on many of these prints. Academic courses are always being revised and adapted each time they're taught. The Mokuhanga Studio course and the 2 iterations of the seminar course for freshmen are no exceptions. What I see as a successful aspect of the seminar course was the equal emphasis on the history of ukiyo-e in conjunction with the studio projects. Using extensively the prints from our collection on multiple occasions proved to be the hook that grabbed students' attention and really drew them into the process that they were learning. Conversely, in the first course that I taught of Mokuhanga, assigning just one research paper without offering sufficient amount of background, lecture, and discussion produced less than ideal outcomes in both the paper and in the prints the students produced. In the spring of 2018, I'll teach the first year Mokuhanga seminar course for the 3rd time. And though I'm happy with the success of the last class, I have more to offer, as I just completed another residency at MILAB this past summer. Once again, the teacher became the student and will go back to being a teacher. The 5-week advanced Mokuhanga residency at MILAB this past summer made it more clear to me the distance between what I know and what I teach. I'm very comfortable making my own Mokuhanga prints. Every residency has added to my repertoire and skill and ambition to produce better and better prints. The amount of information I've learned concerning the intricacies of paper, ink, barons, and printing will definitely affect my own prints. The challenge is to funnel some of that information in a controlled and non-overwhelming way into the seminar when I teach it again. As I stated at the beginning, every time I watch another person print or carve, or learn from a master baron maker, I'm humbled by how much there is to learn. Obviously, I cannot teach everything I know about Mokuhanga to 10 students in one semester. My greatest ambition with teaching either the seminar or the Mokuhanga studio course is to get students interested and hooked on Mokuhanga. Many of them may not take another studio art course while they are at college, as they have other major requirements and may not, most likely, be an art major. But maybe, just maybe, a few years after they are out of college and settled somewhere, they may see an exhibition of woodblock prints and remember the time they made their own prints. And maybe they will find the time to pick up their tools and try carving again. Thank you. That was a donut. That was her inner spirit. Am I to answer questions now? Or at the end? There is a little bit of time.
What happened, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
What happened with all these students that they didn't have an art background? Did they continue doing, did they started to focus on art, or they
Most of them, no. Most of them are, I had 2 biochemistry majors, an economics major, so they were taking this course primarily for a distribution, an arts distribution. Most of them may never come back to take an art course, but I've had some who think they are going to be a business major and already have changed to be, maybe an art minor with their major, or have switched into the major. But it's difficult because they all come with different levels of background. So I have to try and keep everybody sort of on a level plane and still help those who have more interest to sort of accelerate a little.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for you as a teacher.
Yeah.
Because it's very, you have to focus on each person individually.
Yeah. And most of them, a lot of them don't have any tactile skills at all. They probably have never taken an art class even in high school. So at the very beginning, it's a lot of sort of very basic things to get everybody going.
And do you think, because you taught other courses where that didn't happen,
Right.
What's your feeling about a course where you teach people who know about art, and a course where you teach people who are virgin.
I found that because it's Mokuhanga, and because I still feel I'm sort of new at Mokuhanga, it's made me really slow down how I teach, and actually I think made me realize more things about Mokuhanga than if students already had a background in art, even some basic things, you know, about composition, about how, you know, how to read an image. It's really made me better at that than if they had already come with a background and we just start making prints. So I also like the challenge of
it's
students who don't have an art background.
So I was just going to say, any thought along those lines, any thoughts about creating a Mokuhanga course for people who are interested in art or have an art background as opposed to, you know, the way you
Yeah, so the first Mokuhanga class I taught, I did not have an art prerequisite for it. And I think now that, I think I might. So I have a sort of an upper level printmaking class that's Mokuhanga, so students have at least a drawing class or something before they come to that. And the seminar class, which is for first year students, would be for students who don't have a background. So I could sort of have both.
if it were more sophisticated for people who have an art background or are interested in printmaking in general, what things would you change or add?
I would still require the research component to it. I really like that aspect of it. But I think we could do more experimental work with the printing and with carving and with inks, where I don't get to do any of that with the basic, where it's, you know, a month of just learning to carve an image, you know. So we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
How do you handle supplies?
I try and keep it as affordable as possible. So I actually go through McLean's, and they put together a kit. So my students can call, and they already have a kit assembled. It's a very basic kit, and it's probably around $80. So 3 tools, a few wood blocks, some brushes, and everything else. Thankfully, I teach at a college that still has a decent budget for supplies, and I'm able to supplement everything else. All the inks. I get a little crazy ordering paper, and we order all sorts of paper to play around with, but I supplement most of the supplies. And having said that, I have the student who did the ping pong playing turtles. He's now a sophomore, and he's thinking of being an art major, but he came by the studio the other day and he asked if he could have some wood blocks. He's not in my class at all, and so I let students come in. Students like that, anytime they want to come in, I will find supplies for them to print. Oh yeah.
Just one more, sorry. I don't really know where you come from, but I'm just curious about the climate and where you come from, if that was any effects.
The opposite of Kawaguchi. So it's very cold in the winter.
Yeah.
So it's upstate New York, right near the Canadian border. So it's warm in the winter and very cold, or warm in the summer, very cold in the winter. And it definitely affects everything I've learned in Japan about printing. It takes a lot to keep the paper damp. Thank you.
I thought I studied at Edinburgh College of Art in Scotland. I studied drawing and painting. I had some early success with my paintings. I won an award that was the Young Scottish Artist of the Year. I had the London Gallery, and things were pretty good. And for whatever reason, I was awarded a small travel scholarship, and I chose to go to Japan for 3 months. So this is me in Hagi in 1990, and there was a tea ceremony for my benefit. There's me. There's a few photographs of me throughout the talk, mostly to give scale to the work. It's me up Mount Fuji on the same trip. And so began my interest with Japan. and my interest with Japanese woodblock printing. When I got back to Scotland, I had an exhibition of kind of oil paintings with crusty oil with kind of Japanese imagery. But along with that, I started doing some very large woodcuts. But this was using oil and using an etching press to print it. But the very first woodcut I did was just a small black and white, and then I went straight to this sort of size. I used quite a lot of power tools, and the nicest thing about this was part of a symposium with 2 Japanese printmakers, and one of them, Atsushi Inoue, who's still a friend 27 years later, he used the traditional Japanese techniques of watercolor printing. So I was fascinated by this, and he suggested that if I wanted to learn it, that I should study in Japan. So that planted the seed, which brought me to study in Japan in '96, finishing in 2000. I was on a Monbusho scholarship. Japanese government funded the whole trip. I had to learn Japanese language, and I was there for 3.5 years. So this jumps. I don't want to go through the whole repertoire of my work. It's specifically about how did I arrive at making sculptural mokuhanga, and how did I arrive with making larger prints, and the interplay between the two forms. So this is 2007. I was on a residency in Sandnes, which is near Stavanger in Norway. The previous day I'd been walking up in the amazing fjords in the landscape. I was completely bowled over by this day trip. And that evening in the studio, I made imagery that's very like this one on the left, but they were very just simplified fjords in black and white Sau-mui ink. Kind of instigated by the fact that I had knocked over a bottle of Sau-mui ink, which was quite expensive, and normally I use colour predominantly, and I started using these very simple, simplified ideas of fjords that I'd been in. Working till probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, very frustrated with what I was doing, snacking on a box of dates, and I wrapped the print round the date box. I liked it. I went home feeling quite happy. The next morning I was quite excited about getting back to the studio, and I made a companion piece with another date box. And this was kind of the beginnings of a conceptual shift in my own work. So then I went out my way to find wooden box lids. There's a kind of tradition of that in Scandinavia. And again, I wrapped and made prints purposely to wrap around these forms. There's a kind of Japanese writing on some of the pages. I was using pages from old Meiji prints, partly because the paper was over 100 years old, and it meant that I could print with paper that wasn't really sized, and I could play with the idea of the print moving a little bit, bleeding a little bit, or not. This was called Nest. I then expanded that series, and again, I guess the idea that no longer are you confined to a sort of square print format, but it can space that's all around these forms. This was about rooftops in Stavanger. I then continued this idea back in Scotland, just with objects that resonated with me, with that experience in Norway. So I started using the mokuhanga to wrap these different forms. The form on the right is the candle key. And at the same time, the flat Mokuhanga that I was using was often using similar colours, similar forms that I was translating into the sculptural work. Jumping forward a little bit, I mean, again, in a way, nothing's that linear in most artists' work. In between all of this period, I had a residency in Dublin, in Ireland, and I actually was in a workshop famous for etching. And I did a series over 2 months of works that combined etching and Mokuhanga. I also had a residency in Edinburgh in a sculpture workshop for 2 months. And at the sculpture workshop, I took that earlier form that you saw, which was about this size, and I made it, I scaled it up 3 times, so it was this size. So then starts the idea of not just using a found object, but actually building forms that I would then wrap with the Mokuhanga. And at the same time, I was stretching up the scale of the prints I was making. In my earlier work, when I studied in Japan with the Mokuhanga, I kind of, in my paintings, there was a lot of imagery. And through the process of working with the different tools and the different equipment in Japan, the imagery got very much more simplified. And as I worked more and more with the Mokuhanga, I got more and more interested in no imagery or less imagery, or imagery that was condensed or abstracted. And I became more and more interested in just the inherent beauty of Mokuhanga, in the different effects you can get with the printing, soft printing, hard printing, grain, no grain. This was my studio, not the studio I'm currently in, the studio prior to that. A lot of the studio was given over to storage. I felt very crammed in the sort of space I was making for the scale of the kind of prints I wanted to make. But I wanted to illustrate that this is just simply a physical problem of how much space can you work in. It also had, I had this little mezzanine, so I could go upstairs and look down on the prints I was working on. On the larger scale, what I found was that it was very difficult to visualize what the end piece would be. So there was a lot of working on maybe 2 halves at once, and stopping and starting, changing, just in the way that you would work with an abstract work. I was doing it in a kind of a painterly way. Also, in the studio, I was very affected by the light, which I loved. It was the sunlight used to move around the studio, and I think that really had an influence on the sculpture work I was making as well. It harks back to the idea of the original inspiration of being in the fjords in Norway, where often you would have 1/2 of the fjord in shadow and 1/2 in sunlight. And often I'd work in diptychs. This was a traditional wooden violin case in Scotland, and I adapted the form, I kind of cut bits off of it to give it a more interesting shape. it's an installation kind of often at that time as well, because my studio is quite small. You better watch my time. It was often only when I was exhibiting that I could actually see more clearly the relationships between things. If you're in a small studio and you're working on one work and you think it relates to another work, it becomes very frustrating and liberating when you then actually have an exhibition and you can put the work up on the wall and start to see sort of colour relationships, forms, shapes, and how they echo and move between the things. But Japan's always been an inspiration. I try and go about every 2 or 3 years. I think fundamentally the sort of Japanese aesthetic was the main drive and the main interest. But when you see a photograph of this kind of views through the windows, the shapes and forms of the tatamis and the sliding doors, it kind of filters through to a lot of the work I was doing at the time. And always working in series so that they kind of relate to each other. It's kind of like getting an idea and just running with it until it runs out in a kind of a way. Often I've used varnish on the wood too. There's varnish on here and there's varnish up in some of these parts. It's something that was advocated where I studied at Tama Art University, used quite a lot, and used in different ways. I'm just going to run through to get back to some of the sculptural things. This is called Black Rain. I guess there's been some talks this morning about some relationship to ecology, what's going on in the world. But behind a lot of the prints, although they're abstract, they're abstracted, they're often, for me, relate to events in the world. They relate to feelings about the landscape, what's going on. Often it's just hinted at in the title. This was a piece that, again, it harks back to that initial impulse of fjords in Norway. It's called Echo, I think, maybe Echo 2. It was interesting for me because it was selected for an exhibition in Japan of Mokuhanga, and they selected one of the sculptural prints for an exhibition in the Metropolitan Museum. And literally, it was really about that memory of that strong experience I had. So the sunlight, the shadows, the har. In fact, it's called har, I remember now. Har is the sort of sea fog that comes into the fjords. You get it in Scotland too. If anybody want to ask anything, feel free. The forms were predominantly made from solid tulip wood. I would gesso them to seal them. And often, maybe on the, if I go back to the front face of the work, often in parts of them I would add marble dust and polishing them up so they were very, very shiny. Let's just run through a kind of series of.
What's the scale of each ball?
They're about this height, about this wide. again, as I said, in my work in general, working on series is, so you just run with an idea and just versions of it.
Are some of them painted or is it all paper wrap?
It's all Mokuhanga wrap,
all-
yeah. I think it's a good question, and I guess the essential thing is that the Mokuhanga gives you marks and textures that are completely unique, and those are the textures and the qualities that I love. So,
Are you mounting them on wet gesso?
no.
The gesso dries and then.
Gesso's dried. The gesso is mostly to seal from the wood, seal any possibilities of acid leaching from the woods.
So how are you mounting them on the gesso wood?
With a kind of mixture of rice paste and other glues. Give all your secrets away. And also, just basically, I got more and more skillful. And meanwhile, we'll come to it. I came back as an invited artist to my lab and me lab, and part of that experience was making Japanese yobu, and it just heightens your understanding of the papers, what the limits of what the paper can do. Sometimes in the beginning, when I was doing these wraparound prints, that things would just you kind of have to pull it and make a tension in the work, and the bit would just fall apart. So you have to become more and more comfortable with what's going on. I did a big series of these more simplified forms, but I don't want to illustrate to you. Back to Japan, any chance I could possibly get. Again, sometimes it's one day of heightened experience of looking at things. Could be one day of drawing, one day that just gives you something strong. This was a day in a particular park in Tokyo, and in a kind of a way, when I got back to Scotland, was imagination of a combination of the trees, a tree, and the kind of brutalist architecture. And I started making these chunkier forms. So this one I started wrapping. And also it coincided with a much bigger studio, much more space. The amount of space I had to work on was doubled with storage area. The storage area was even bigger than my working space. And this was great because it allowed me to work on more bigger prints, more sculptural work, more understanding of how things actually all relate to each other. So this relates directly to that experience of that garden, and it's called Black Tree City, I think. I can't remember, something like that. And also that play with a form and how you can redefine it by the printed element, so that it can make it more confusing, it can add a different dimension to the work. Something that I've enjoyed. So this is the flip side of the same work, and again, playing with that idea that stems from the fjord, it stems from being in a sunlit studio where the light moves around the work. And it kind of, hinted at, and it kind of gave me a way to have this idea that you can look at the work one way and it looks like it's sunlit, and from another way it's in the shadow. So, that's for scale, obviously. This is looks better than I guess, quite simply, I started selling some of these big prints, and for quite good money. And I had a terrible situation where a client bought a piece. It was this piece, actually. And it's quite nice to see the scale of it. They got it home. They got it hung in their home, and they have underfloor heating, and the panels started warping. And the gallery got in touch. And I thought it might be a little bit of movement. It was embarrassing when I saw them really buckled. I just couldn't believe how bad it developed the technique on a bigger scale. And I damped and took all the tape off and transferred them onto the aluminium panels and restretched them. And thankfully it went well, because you never want to do that ever. Just a few more.
So is this a single print? It's not a collage of different prints?
It's a single print in 3 sections. So this would be one section, and this would be another section, and this would be, no, this is a section, this here, and this one here. But also, it's in 3 sections because I can only handle a sheet of paper that's big in terms of dampening the paper, printing the paper, manipulating the paper. But the nice thing for me is that this way of working in 3 sections or 4 sections or 2 sections, it means that you get another go at it. You can have a section and actually it doesn't work. It just doesn't balance, and you can remake a whole panel and match it better. And sometimes that doesn't even work. As you change elements in the whole picture and maybe beef up a color, beef up an area, or a block slips, so you have to introduce black. It might mean that you add on bits, but it's nice. It gives you a way of working that's freer. I think without labouring the point, there becomes more of a relationship between the flat works and the three-dimensional works and the flat works.
I have a question.
This is, yeah?
I want to know, like, with the pieces being so large, like, how long does it take for you to prepare your registration? Like, for each piece to fit together like a puzzle piece?
Sometimes it's really difficult, and sometimes it's surprisingly easy. There are different ways of registering blocks, and it depends how complicated the section is. Is that enough?
I'll lead up to the question. Sorry. So these are bleed prints. You don't have to worry about white border to
No.
have a clean registration.
To be honest, usually they do have a border.
They do have a
Yeah,
border usually.
almost usually always.
And I have a follow-up question. That the subtlety in the work is there a lot of resist? You said you use varnish as a resist. In this print, there's varnish in this section.
and especially with these cut marks in it, it's, you know, drawing like with a squeegee, pulling the Sau-mui ink across the varnish, then the varnish resists the ink. And if you make cut holes, it goes in and out. It's kind of fun. It becomes an element of chance. In the beginning, you worry about these things, exactly what's going to happen. In the end, you just do it. Sometimes, usually the varnish part comes in late in the print, but sometimes I start with the varnish part because if I don't like it, I'll start it another way. But what I worked out for me personally over time, that no matter if you've invested a lot of time in a biggish print with different areas and different problems, it's always best just to go for it. You know, if it doesn't work, there's going to be a way of sorting it out, but not to be timid with it. Just, I like the varnish, the randomness of that. I enjoy that a lot.
So the squeegee is really integrity on which you want to print. It's filling out the negative line. And you have I have lots of questions. I have one more.
Hang on, let me
The
see
size
what's
of the
coming up.
wood
Okay.
for these prints, the size of the block.
It varies, but usually the blocks are sometimes I get blocks that are pretty big, but usually they're, you know, about a 90 centimeter by 60 size block, standard kind of big block size. I think this is nice. I recently exhibited this piece next to this piece with the 3D thing. There was a lovely relationship happening between the two, and satisfying for me. What was someone was going to ask?
Do you put any kind of coating over the print?
Yes, I do. It's a worry, yeah, because the paper's exposed.
Yes, yeah.
But I always talk about that with people who buy them or commission them. And the reason that people are drawn to them is because because it is a look.
Mm-hmm.
It looks, it's matte, it's direct. There's no frame, there's no glass, and I always offer the possibility of a perspex box, and occasionally that happens. So I get a perspex box built, goes over the whole thing, and I drill it into the panel all the way around. But normally they don't want that, and then what I talk about is I spray the whole print about 20 to 30 times with Lasco UV protective spray. It's a very good product. It's a relatively new product, and it's not only does it give the print potentially a much bigger longevity in terms of colours and so on. Although I never worry about that either. I always use very high quality pigments. And it's not like a lick of. It's not. Usually they're printed a lot of pigment pushed right into the paper. But I spray it with 20 to 30 layers of Lasco UV spray, which is acrylic based. So in actual fact, what it means is you could take a dry cloth and you could dust the thing. It's not going to harm it at all. Because dust is a problem as well. Dust is a big problem for paper. Similarly with the sculptural things, they're all sprayed as well, always. The only problem I have, and if someone is interested in that particular artwork, is some of the earlier ones. I used MDF, and although I painted a lot of layers of sealant, MDF is a product that I think is not a good. It's not got a long life. I think there's a lot of acid in it. I have a problem with MDF. I try never to use it now. If I do use it, I make sure it's got a lot of sealant on it. A lot. Oh, I forgot. I added these on just if we've got time. This was just a very recent exhibition. And again, what was nice, this is only about 5 shots, so I'll just quickly run through them. But I had a residency up in Lewis, which is a small island off the northwest of Scotland. And it really showed the process of, the whole exhibition was about the process. And it showed the process of me doing straight watercolours and drawings up there, and then work that was woodcuts that related very almost slightly topographically, although they were always made up about the landscape, and then also other abstract drawings, abstracted drawings that I work in parallel with the more topographical drawings, and then also a big work at the same time. And I illustrate all the tools that I use. In an exhibition, almost any time I get a chance to, I'll exhibit the tools and try and inform people of what's going on in the process. And usually I do demonstrations as well.
So your hand pressing with a baron
Always.
of the large scale?
Yeah, always. Use the only control you can really have. I think that's it.
I have a question. I appreciate the geometry in your work, and looking back at earlier pieces that the forms that are rapid and more organic, less angular. Have you ever printed wood that's been cut to shape other than rectangular or something?
The blocks that I'm printing from?
Yes. Have you ever cut your blocks into any other shape?
No. I think this last one was just illustrating that varnish thing as well with scratches. You can almost get like an etch and feel to the work if you want. I got cautious over some of the work I did was almost topographical of the landscape up there, and then there was these semi-in-between ones. And I just went with it. There's things started looking like rain, I would just go with it. Though I'm cautious, I don't want things to be too literal. That's not what I want. But I went with it. People liked them, so I did more. Any more questions?
How, let's say, if you were interested in envisioning things, how would that change your work, do you think?
Well, for example, that this print and a series, maybe I did a series of 6, 12, at least 12 of this sort of format, and people liked them, people bought them, and they were all one-offs. So I would just go back and select one, and then I would make a small addition, 10, 12, or something like that. I don't, I guess as well, sometimes I would just do additional variations. So just drop in another block or cut or do a little bit of reduction printing or something like that. It just sort of makes them unique and it makes it fun to print. And then sometimes there's a print where I just have to. I'll do the edition of 30 because everybody seems to like it. So I'll just do an addition, all the same. Okay, I think I've run a little bit over.
Hello everybody. A little bit like Paul's, a little bit nervous, and I've got quite a lot of noise, so if you can't hear me, just my name is Jacqueline Gribbin. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living in Australia for the last 10 years. And just to give you a little bit of background, I've been working for a long time, I guess as a printer more than an artist, as a career printer, both in Japan, Singapore, and finally Australia. But for the last, say, 3 years, I've been concentrating more on my own studio practice. I set up a studio where I live. And so what I'm going to do today is just introduce a little bit of where I live and work at the moment. 3 projects that I've been working on since 2015, which are pretty much related to the environment where I am. So I'm currently in the Northern Territory, which is in the big red area there. And to put some figures here, the Northern Territory is 1.3 million square kilometres. The Americans here, that's 500,000 square miles. So I did look it up. It's twice the size of Texas. So that gives you some idea of just that one area of Australia that we're in. Right at the top is the town of Darwin. I'm probably about 45 minutes out of Darwin in a rural area with a very interesting name called How-to-do. Yeah, that's quite a rural area, and it's on the road to Kakadu National Park, which is a well-known park up there. Lots of tourists come to visit. The territory, basically on the west, you've got Western Australia, the south, South Australia. Everything to the east is Queensland, and then of course up north is Darwin. There are quite a lot of little islands above Darwin as well as indigenous communities there. So the climate of Darwin is quite harsh in a lot of ways. So we have what's called a dry season, generally from about May to September. So we have beautiful dry days, cool nights, and then around September, October, November, we call it's what's called a build-up. So we get this humidity slowly creeping in. So by the time we get to November, everybody up there is kind of ready to kill each other. It's just such intense humidity. That breaks then around the end of November, December, we get the monsoon, so we get a lot of rain, and the country, which until then has been very dry, very burnt out, suddenly becomes very lush, very green, and everything cools down. So in 2015, I was invited to be what's called an artist in the park, which is kind of residency program at what's called the Territory Wildlife Park. Luckily for me, this is about 20 minutes from where I live. And the Territory Wildlife Park is a government-run park. And it's there to provide tourists and also locals with different environments. So it's what they call like a goose lagoon and a monsoon forest, there are wetlands. They also have aquariums, aviaries, do quite a lot of work with animals, so any animals that are injured or found are often brought to the park and then re-released into the wild. Unfortunately, because it is government run, it's on a very tight budget, so there are actually no residential facilities or studio facilities as such. But what it does, it gives you access to the park completely freely from May to December, so it covers different seasons, and you can just access the park generally, and also you get to see behind the scenes things that the public generally don't see. So for me initially, I would go there maybe a couple of times a week, and on the right is what's called the Goose Lagoon, and this was actually still very flooded after the dry season. I was very attracted to this area because of that flooding, because of the beautiful reflections in the water, and it immediately appeals to my sensibilities in terms of doing some Mokuhanga. There was also the monsoon forest, which again was a beautiful environment for kind of playing light and shadow. It was quite dark down below, but you would get the light filtering down from the trees, and the beautiful trees with lots of different markings of multiple effects. So in that term, that way I was thinking about producing some Mokuhanga. But it's also a very difficult environment to actually sit down and do any drawing or painting, because there's also a lot of mosquitoes, sunflies, so it's not very conducive to a relaxing time. So I found myself doing a lot of walking and a lot of photographing around the park. On the way to the monsoon forest each morning, I would actually have to pass through the aviaries. I'm not particularly a fan of aviaries as such, because I just like the idea, I guess, of birds being free. There's still a sense that they're trapped. But as I passed through the aviaries each morning, I would see these same birds, and it occurred to me that usually you don't get to see the same bird again. You know, it's in the wild, you get to see it once and that's it. You may see the same birds in the garden if you keep feeding them, but generally it's an unusual situation. So the more I passed through these aviaries, the more I got a feel for some of the characters of the birds, and whether they were hanging out or whether they were fighting with each other or feeding. So I would go eventually and I'd just sit there and basically hang out with the birds. So that set me on to creating these prints. And this is a little bit of a new thing for me to work on what for me was quite a large scale, so about 1 meter by 60. I was working in a very free way, so I didn't do any initial sketches as such on paper, but I felt that I would start drawing on the wood. And I must give thanks to Paul actually and Ralph, because I looked at them painting the varnish on the wood, how they do that. So I thought I'd have an experiment and have a go at that. So it was started off as a combination of just painting on the wood and carving, and then doing some proofing, seeing how it went, and then continuing that process until I felt I reached a point where I was happy. I did a few of these with different versions. The other thing that I felt while I was doing this, that I guess as well because I was working on a large size, but the thing that had originally attracted me again to these birds, that I noticed there was a lot of play of light and shadow between their cage and the outer forest, and that's kind of what I was trying to capture within these images. So I didn't want to frame it again in a traditional manner. I wanted that work to stand alone. So again, taking a little bit out of Paul's work, looking at him doing that like sculptural work. This is obviously isn't sculptural, but I thought I would mount it on a wooden frame. So it's actually on about 5 centimetres or 4, about 6 centimetres on a frame. So I just glued it to gesso panel and presented it like that. So for me, that was something new that I hadn't done before, and I felt it worked quite well. I was quite happy. These were just unique prints because I was experimenting with the varnish, and I couldn't feel like I got the consistency to do an edition. I just actually quite enjoyed not having to edition. I actually spent about 20 years editioning, so it's actually quite a relief not to to edition these and just experiment and see them as unique prints. One of the prints was in an exhibition called Prints, or the NT is the Northern Territory. This was a show that was to celebrate 50 years of the Print Council of Australia. The Print Council of Australia does a lot to promote Australian printmaking, both domestically and internationally, and also produces a quarterly printmaking magazine. So this exhibition included antique printmakers across the world, participants. And in this show I also included this little book, which actually came out of the MILAB residency that I did in Japan. And I created these just very little Mount Fuji images with the shifting of the clouds when it's Mount Fuji. I was actually lucky enough to be in one of the best rooms where I opened my curtains in the morning and there was Mount Fuji, but it was always different, the clouds were always shifting. So I could just produce a whole load of unique prints using the same Mount Fuji as a template. And when I got back to Australia, I made this little book, which I hope displays how it was shown. At the same time that I was doing this residency at the park, I was also invited to take part in another project. So it somewhat interrupted my residency because this one had a specific deadline. So this one, the project title is Secret World, Carnivorous Plants of the Howard Sand Sheets. The Howard Sand Sheets, again, are an area quite close to where I live, but I wasn't really aware of what was there and how important it was. And we were invited, 5 artists from Darwin were invited to take part with the gallery. They also involved a local botanist and a local conservation group, and we were invited to take part in a couple of field trips and workshops. And the carnivorous plants are actually called bladderworts, and they're very, very minute flowers that exist there. And they're actually currently under threat because of local sand mining for concrete buildings and also for recreational purposes. You can see here. This photograph was actually taken the day that we arrived to do our field trip, so these guys were just coming through and wrecking the environment. The photograph on the right is actually not the original natural environment because that area has also experienced sand mining. So the companies are actually saying that they will return the environment to the way that it originally was, which actually isn't really true. But it's interesting to see that some of the bladderworts, these flowers, do come back in different areas once the sun mining is complete, but a lot of it is being destroyed. So when we arrived for the field trip, the Northern Territory bush, as we call it, can be quite sparse looking and not terribly interesting. So we arrived on this hot day, and yeah, it didn't look terribly interesting. Like, well, what are we doing here? But then we were led further in, and we were basically told to look down very closely. The ground was very soggy, very wet. We were told to wear boots. We were floating through all this muddy water. And that's when we discovered these bladderworts, these beautiful tiny flowers. You can see here how small they actually are. And the Northern Territory has a high concentration of these flowers in various species. It also has these sundews. And the bladderworts are called because if you go beneath the water, they actually have a small bladder, and that they can actually attract the insects into that. And the sundews actually have these little things here the insects go to and they get stuck on there. So beautiful, but a little bit ugly as well. So this is the first print that I produced for this. I was struggling a little bit just to work with the flowers, and so I started to look just at the environment itself, and I was quite interested to see this very muddy, confusing landscape. It wasn't a landscape in the traditional sense of the word with the horizon, unless you're actually lying right down in the mud. So yeah, I think I really focused on that confusion and all the different things that were happening down below in the water, the mud there. And this also. Some of the flowers are on very delicate, very small like this, but they're on very long stems. So I think I showed you the previous this picture here. So you can see them are very long stems. So the dry season is very breezy, so you get this feeling of these beautiful yellow and purple flowers flying back and forth. If anybody wants to ask questions along the way, please do. This image and the next one, yeah, I think I was trying to create more of a contrast between the muddy kind of greyness of the water with the beautiful flowers there. This one, Utricularia Magnificima, incredibly tiny, you almost need a microscope to see it, but it's a beautiful little pink flower. This is sun juice. So yeah, we had an exhibition in Darwin at the Mānoa Art Gallery, which invited us to the project. And we also had some artist forums and talks. It's actually a very, I think, successful and popular show because it attracted the conservationists as well as the artists, and also a lot of local residents who, like myself, weren't aware of this very important place before the project began. So, yeah, we had a lot of interest in that. In the background, which I've not really included in this, it's not Mokuhanga, but the artist also worked on a collaborative piece, which was drawing and watercolor painting, which is what you see on this screen there. My third project is not specifically about the Northern Territory, although there are elements of it that are related to the Northern Territory. This has been a project that's been a long time coming, but it's pretty much consumed me this year. Some years ago, when I was still working at the printmaking workshop at the university, somebody told me about some letterpress blocks that were at the local museum. So I went to have a look, and this is pretty much what I discovered. They weren't archives, they weren't being conserved. They were just these very, obviously very old letterpress blocks that were in cardboard boxes. So me and my colleague had a good look at them, and yeah, it was incredibly exciting as a printmaker to discover these, but also exciting to be wondering where these were from. They were clearly quite old, but we didn't know really anything about them. We looked at a lot of the images, and it seemed to be very marine based, so lots of images of fish. Some of them were wrapped in very old newspapers and string, but they had the original notes in pencil on them. So So it's quite intriguing. So I did a little bit more research, and I discovered that the blocks actually originated from the Australian Museum in Sydney. And so that began a correspondence with them. And quite a long story, but the museum in Sydney still had several hundred more of these blocks. And originally were planning to throw them away when a colleague or worker there decided to save some of them, and that's how they, cut a long story short, ended up in the museum in boxes of Darwin. So she'd actually saved them from being thrown away. Anyway, a little bit more talking to the museum, and it turns out that many of the blocks came from images that were originally drawn by a guy called Gilbert Whitley. Gilbert Whitley was actually originally from England, and then he migrated as a teenager to Australia. Very soon, as a young man, he got himself in the Australian Museum and spent the rest of his life working there until he retired. So he started as a trainee and ended up being the chief what they call archaeologist or the curator of fishes. As I delved more into this, I became absolutely fascinated by Gilbert Whitley and his life, almost as much as I was originally fascinated by the letterpress blocks themselves as a printmaker. He was absolutely dedicated to his work. He travelled all over the world, all over Australia, completely obsessed by fish.
Sorry, Jacqueline.
Yeah.
When you say letterpress blocks, were they a hardwood or they?
They're metal and they're all mounted on
wood. Yeah.
They're not actually words, they're actually the images, but it's still letterpress, yeah. So Gilbert Whitley would do the original drawing, usually in black pen and ink.
And then an engraver? Or
sorry?
would it be engraved or?
No, he would do the original drawing, and then he would provide instructions on the size and the proportions of the fish, if you like, to what he called the block maker. So that was the person who made the letterpress blocks or the plates, and he'd send that away. And yeah, they're basically etched and engraved.
Right. Yeah.
And then they would be actually printed, and they would serve as the illustrations in his publications and his papers and his books and journals. So that was, obviously now it's all obsolete, but at that time that was the kind of very long process of getting illustrations into book. I'm drawing a fish there. So through this process of research, like I say, I became as much interested in Gilbert as the images themselves. And I went down to the museum in Sydney to look at the archives. And I had no idea what was waiting for me, but Gilbert Whitley essentially was a hoarder, and the amount of stuff, documents, drawings, letters of Gilbert Whitley's that they have in the museum is unbelievable, and I've really only seen a fraction of that. There are hundreds and hundreds of more blocks that are just packed away in storage. So I guess the other thing that attracted me to Gilbert was reading more of his archives. He wasn't just a dry curator of fishes or a scientist. He was quite a humorous character, charismatic, and very interested in the arts. He goes to exhibitions, concerts regularly. Amongst his papers are heaps of very silly doodles and jokes and poems, all that kind of thing. So I thought, yeah, that he was becoming very important to this project. So I coordinated with the Australian Museum, and they gave me copyright release to use these letterpress blocks in a project to create artwork. These are just a couple of the blocks that we found. So earlier this year, I started creating works. I'm actually originally trained in etching, so woodblock is something that I came to much later. When I started this project, it took me a while to figure out the best way to work with Gilbert's work and also to produce something of mine in collaboration with his, if you like. So at the beginning, I started to work in etching. That's what I felt comfortable with, and I found a way to work with some of his fishes. I say fishes because that apparently is the correct way of saying it, because we're talking about different species of fish. So his fishes. Some of his fishes were very small and very delicate, so I felt that working in a very linear way in etching worked well for me. But I'll come back to that a little bit later. I didn't obviously want to present the etchings today. This is really all about Mokuhanga. So these works are actually quite recent. They're actually just on show in Sydney at the moment. I think as I became more familiar with the sea, and I discovered all these marine terms like pelagic and mesopelagic and all that, I think I got quite excited about the movement of the sea and felt I could work within woodblock to create fluidity and the sense of lightness and darkness. So the one in the middle is actually Gilbert Whitley's hatchetfish, which is a deep sea fish. Generally lives in what's called the twilight zone. So it's that area of the sea that doesn't receive much light. The fish itself actually has little lights on itself which can deter any predators, and that also works with the lightness and the darkness of the sea. So it's really, very much a play on the shadow and the lightness. The one on the right, again, one of Whitley's lancetfish, which is a deep sea fish. So again, working very much with the lights and the shadow. On the left is the euphoric flyer, which is a flying fish, which actually pretty much flies or propels itself across the surface of the water to escape predators. And if you see it in action, it's quite amazing. So I don't see these necessarily as a triptych or a set, but they kind of work well together, which is why I presented them like that today.
Are you mounting all of these on the board?
No, these ones are just the paper, and they've just been framed. So I've come quite a way with doing the etchings and doing the woodblocks, but I still felt that I wanted to break out of that a little bit, do something that was possibly more an installation or something that again wasn't constricted by the frame. So I wanted to, without sounding too corny, I didn't wanted to give the fish a little bit more freedom or room to breathe. So I went through the blocks that I had on loan. I've got about 200 of these blocks in my studio, and found some rough groupings. So he seems to have quite a lot of Queensland fish, so he spent a lot of time in Queensland, a lot of herrings, a lot of river fish. There was one other group, I can't remember what that was. Anyway, I found 4 rough groups. I didn't want to get too caught up in the science of it. And I just started experimenting. I wanted to use some kind of paper that was quite translucent, so it can give a lightness to the process and the result. So this is what I came up with. So these are about 2.5 meters long. They look a little bit like scrolls, but that's not necessarily the effect that I wanted to create. It was really more just about the translucency and the fact that the paper was quite light and had the freedom to flex and shift when it was on exhibition. So I've given 4 very subtle different cues yeah, in March I had the show of only actually the etchings. So this is one of the etchings. This was a show in Darwin at Mānoa Art Gallery again. And the show on the right, which is currently on in Sydney, included all the beautiful plots. Before I go on, actually, I forgot to mention I did have a kind of slightly sad but funny story about billfish. As I was actually finishing the billfish, it was quite late one night. I got news that my father-in-law had been taken ill, so I dropped everything and we rushed in to see him, but unfortunately he'd already passed away. So as I completed the work, I thought that it would be quite a nice idea to pull this billfish, because he'd been anticipating this exhibition and hoping to come and see my work. And many years ago he lived in Papua New Guinea, and he always talked about a very big fish tank that he had there, and he loved it very much. And felt very sad after he left Papua New Guinea to get rid of this fish tank. So there isn't actually a billfish. There is a billfish in the sea, but there isn't actually a billfish in the work, which I think you would probably have enjoyed that. A bit of a chat about that. So yeah, the work on the right is currently on show in Sydney. It's actually a joint show with Gribbin and Mānoa, who's an Indigenous artist, also from the Northern Territory. And her work is related to crafts. It's a kind of quality system there in relation to crafts. But it was quite a nice combination there for us to come together and also to Northern Territory artists to be showing in Sydney. The title for this show, Dear Gilbert, Song for the Theologists, actually came from a little poem. There are actually several little poems or songs that we found in the archives, and they may or may not have been written by Gilbert, I'm not sure. But one of them is a song to theologists. So I thought, well, this exhibition for me is kind of writing a letter to Gilbert, so this is my song for Gilbert, if you like. I just thought I'd finish, that's just near where I live, so I just thought I'd finish on that. So I hope you get some sense of the Northern Territory and my work. Northern Territory, I think, is an incredibly harsh place. It's a huge place, but very, very harsh. You know, it's either very dry and very hot, and it's susceptible to bushfires, or it seems to be fairly big rain and mosquitoes. But it does also have some really wonderful things if you look more closely at that. And it have a little.
Do you think you'll always live there?
Sorry?
Do you think you'll always live there?
Maybe. It must be getting 3 years. Yes.
I have a question. Could you please go back to the previous slide where the letterpress print? Yeah. Is it the real letterpress or just a wood print?
No, they're all metal plates, but they've all been mounted on blocks of wood.
I guess it's the same question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
I guess, you all might know that Hong Kong is located on the southern edge of China. So it was a fishing village when it became the British colony in 1942. So Hong Kong has a really unique situation because we were a British colony, and we now belong to China. So the political situation of Hong Kong a unique place to shelter people from the north, those intellectual merchants and civilians during the war, the Civil War or the World War II in China. After the Japanese surrender, the Civil War pushed China into a situation of civil unrest. Hence, Hong Kong has a long history. When the economy started booming in the 70s, after World War II, Hong Kong started transforming to a financial and cultural hubs. We have artists from the West, and the exhibition presented by the City Hall Museum and the Art Gallery, and also the cultural consulate in Hong Kong left a great impact to the young artists back then. Through recent decades, Hong Kong woodblock printing are slowly separating from the roots from the modern woodcut movement and developed a unique voice, a contemporary one. This paper, what we are going to will investigate the development of woodblock printmaking in Hong Kong from the 1930s to today. So what we are going to see the images today are mostly from the Hong Kong Museum of Art and the Hong Kong Heritage Museum of Art from their print collection. So what we are looking here at the first slide is because before we have everything happening in the art scene, so woodblock printing has been widely applied in the printing industry. So this is a traditional woodblock printing in the 70s. Unfortunately, we no longer have such work printing shop in Hong Kong anymore. This is the last one. So this factory closed in 1976. So the picture was taken a year before it closed down. So as you can see, that the printer there are printing. They print. The Sun Yun Fund has been running it's a family business for 4 generations in Hong Kong. So it's something really unique. But their print product was not only sold in Hong Kong, they also sold in to the Southeast Asia, as far as North America in its golden year. So it closed in 1976, and at the time, using woodblock printing was already a sunset industry. So this is the paper offering that's printed by woodblock printmaking at that time in the 70s. Is from the Heritage Museum collection. Is clothing for the for the people who passed away. When we back to the comment to the woodblock printing has been. So there's a really important key figure person. So he is the key Lu Xun, is the key figure of the playing a key figure in the modern woodblock printmaking in the 30s. So the picture was taken in 1931 in Shanghai. He invited Japanese paint artist Yoshiyama to Shanghai to conduct a week-long workshop. This week-long workshop left a great impact to the modern woodblock print movement in China. So this group are already less than 20 people, and most of them, every one of them, this student, this young man there, or every one of them has play a key leading role in the modern woodcut movement. So Lu Xun initiated a movement in Shanghai, also left, it was in Shanghai, but it also left traces of impact to Hong Kong woodblock printing. Under Lu Xun's leadership, woodblock printing has become a really expressive form which fit the need of that time, because it's easy, it's expressive, and it's budget. So it's because of this, it's best fit the social change in China in the 30s. He organized workshops and curate exhibition and published print catalog to promote woodblock printmaking. Lu Xun has a significant influence to the progressive young artists in China. Tang Yingwei, 1950 to 2000, and Huang Xinbo were two of them, so which I will further introduce them. So this is the work by Tang Yingwei in 1936. Tang Yingwei never met Lu Xun in his lifetime, but they communicate a lot, not with WhatsApp or email. They so Tang Yingwei wrote to Lu Xun and seek for his comment. He sent his print to Lu Xun for comment to Shanghai, and those correspondence was published in the complete work of Lu Xun. So perhaps this is the most ambitious work of Tang Yingwei. It's an illustrated print. It's about 2 meters long. So the whole length is about 2 meters long. So it's illustrative woodcut for a non-fiction novel titled "A Day in China," which is nearly about to convey the life in China on a really specific day, May 21st, 1936. So the composition, there's over 100 characters here demonstrating Tang's skill and his passion of the media. Tang left China and settled in Hong Kong in 1938, and he makes his living as a botanical illustrator until his retirement. So Tang has this is the detail of A Day in China. So as you can see, is at the time he was slightly over 20, less than 30 years old. So and this is the catalog that he published in 1941, a scenery of Hong Kong, and it's an Admiralty in Hong Kong. And also this is a catalog printed in 1960. I think you can see the differences between these two. In the catalog published in 1941 still have a really strong sense of the modern woodcut movement. But in the one in the 60s is a floral print, it's a woodcut print. And I think perhaps it's a reflection of his life in Hong Kong, more relaxed and refined. So this is Lu Xun, and this is the artist that we are going to talk about is Huang Xinbo. So compare with Tang Yingwei, his fellow printmaker, they were peers. His fellow printmaker, Huang Xinbo, 1916 to 1980, took another path of life. Huang was the pioneer of the modern Chinese woodcut movement. He met Lu Xun in Shanghai in 1936. At the time, he was only 18 years old, this gentleman here. Lu Xun has a really significant impact to Huang Xinbo. So influenced his life and his work. Huang Xinbo fled to Hong Kong after World War II. He lived in Hong Kong for 3 years, from 1945 to 1948. So during his stay in the city, so he completed a series of woodcut printing. So this I'm going to show you two of them here. After selling his blood and By the Happy World in Hong Kong. So it's all about, his subject matter is all about the struggle of life, people's life after World War II. So his bold and heroic images is to convey the people's life at that time. All through Huang's life, he died in 1980, and he went back to China in 1946, 1949. Huang witnessed the establishment of the People's Republic of China, experienced all the political movement in China, Cultural Revolution is included, and also the economic reform in the 90s, and he died in 1980s. So when Tang Yingwei focused his profession as a botanical illustrator and Wang Shenbo worked in the cultural bureaus in China, there were few artists in Hong Kong to bridge up the traditional and paving the path to the contemporary printmaking in Hong Kong. Lei Laodang, so it's a print. He was an overseas Chinese. He was born in Indonesia, and then he went back to China during World War II. He studied printmaking in Chongqing Central University, and then he moved to Hong Kong in 1958. His subject matter is about the life in Hong Kong, especially the country life in Hong Kong. So this is a Tai O, is a place in Hong Kong. It's a fishing village, but you no longer see such scene in Hong Kong. Hardly to see it because Hong Kong is now quite high-rise building everywhere. So I don't see anyone will is planting rice. So it's gone. The image is gone. But I think it's a good way to let us see in the 70s, early 70s, how it looked like in the country. And also Wu Chongge. He was born in China and Guangzhou, and he studied printmaking in the Guangzhou Art Academy. He moved to Hong Kong in 1963, and he's a key player to promote water-based Mokuhanga, water-based printmaking in Hong Kong. So. Tama is also a fishing village, remained unchanged. It's a print done in 1981, so it's from the heritage, from the Museum of Art collection. So his subject matter is all about the scenery in Hong Kong. Zheng Yi. He was the head of the department head of the Chinese Department of Fine Art, Chinese University of Hong Kong. Zheng Yi, he was born in 1936. On the other hand, he graduated from the National Taiwan Normal University in 1958. He took references from the technique of Chinese footprint, somehow like what we have just seen from the Sun Yunfa, the Chinese New Year print. He took references from the technique of Chinese footprints and inspired by the and his script here. He has a series of woodblock printed completed in the mid-60s. This is done in the 1964 water-based woodblock printing. So as I would like to emphasize the color scheme as well. The red, the blue, and the black is originated from the Chinese woodblock print, Chinese New Year's print, footprints. The color scheme from the Chinese footprint. In Zheng Yi studied etching at the Pratt Institute with a one-year grant from the Institute of International Education in 1965, and then he back to Hong Kong and teaching at the Chinese University and then become the department head since from 1984 to 1992. So he's now retired.
living in the state of California. Also, this is one of his earliest prints, printed in 1966. So, a contemporary, Jerry Guan is another artist. Perhaps 1970 is the most vibrant era that not only shaping Hong Kong as a financial hub, but also a cultural hub in the region. As an international city and a gateway to mainland China, Hong Kong drew people from all around the world, while there was a small group of artists study abroad with the overseas funding from or from the Hong Kong government with the government scholarship. When the post-war print renaissance was at its height in the 70s, most of the awardee, Jerry Guan was one of them, studied printmaking at the institution like Black Institute, Atelier 17, and Bright Institute, to name a few. They introduced contemporary printing to the higher education system when they come back to Hong Kong. In the meantime, there were artists from the West teaching printmaking, ukiyo-e, and impressionism at the public institution. And also there are artists took references from the traditional woodblock printing and applied it in their project. The opening of the City Hall Museum and Art Gallery in 1962, now become the Hong Kong Museum of Art, as a milestone of the development of the contemporary art in Hong Kong. There were 68 contemporary printmaking exhibitions staged at the City Hall Museum and Art Gallery from its opening to 1980s. Aside from staging local print art, there were print exhibitions from Japan, Taiwan, France, the United States, England, and Germany. The Hong Kong Museum of Art now hosts an amazing print collection acquired in the 70s and the 80s. The collection included ukiyo-e and the contemporary print from the international renowned printmakers. Under the backdrop mentioned above, Hong Kong young artists soon realized the possibility of printmaking. Water-based woodblock print in particular is because woodblock printing doesn't require processes like etching and lithography do. The technique and medium are similar to Chinese painting and watercolor, so that they can acquire the skill more easily. Jerry Guan here, 1934 to 2008, he was a painter. He obtained his BFA from Columbus College and Design, Ohio, and MFA from Syracuse University of New York. He was the recipient of the National Endowments for the Art Fellowship in 1995. He first investigated water-based woodblock printing at the Certificate of Art and Design Schulenberg Department, the University of Hong Kong. So this is his printing, his woodblock printing, which is done in 1972, now in the Hong Kong Museum of Art collection. And there's another one, artist, Chen Ying-Ge. He is now teaching at Kentucky. He graduated from the University of Oklahoma and also from the University of Cincinnati. He studied water-based woodblock printing in the 70s at the University of Hong Kong. He also references the 10 bamboo studio letter paper, which is a woodblock print letter set in during the 17th century. this print earned Chen an award of the Hong Kong Contemporary Art Biennale in 1977. So his subject matter is about the way is a wall used but never filled is from Laoji. So it was his subject matter. Actually, I think it's an interesting discovery when I was preparing the paper for this conference, and when I checked with the Hong Kong Museum of Art collection, and I found this gentleman, Clifton Kapu, in the collection of Museum of Art and stayed as the local art collection. I guess as you all know that he was an American. It's also a key printmaker in the Kyoto art community. Kapu, an American who was born in Minnesota, he studied at the Minnesota Art School from 1950 to 1952. And then he moved to Japan as a missionary. He started learning Mokuhanga in Kyoto and soon took a leading role in the printmaking community there. And when I was studying it, I was wondering why he is in the local art collection, in our local art collection. So, so this is the print that he did in Hong Kong in the late in 1978. I guess it's just a guess. It's a commission from the Hong Kong Tourist Board or from the Cathay Pacific, because all those images are the tourist spot in Hong Kong, the Castries in 1978, and the Hong Kong Island, I believe, is Aberdeen. So you also can find this tourist spot in the tourist book here nowadays. So it's an interesting discovery for us, and to me, I guess we have to do more study and research on his work, and how many more he printed in Hong Kong, and how he associated with the Hong Kong art community. Okay, here, this is one of my favorites. So Wang Keizi, he was born in 1945, passed away in 2010. He was a multidisciplinary artist. He was a painter, an author, and also an expert on Mandarin pop after 1945. Huang, he didn't major in printmaking or art. He majored in English and further studied communication in the United States. He learned printmaking, water-based printmaking from Wuchang, where I showed you earlier. So it's a printing. Actually, he's a painter. This is a print that he did for his birthday. It's about his birthday, and he was 36 at that time. A lively self-portrait, and the Chinese writing is about I'm slightly over 36. I don't want to speak anything more. Time flies, and I have to. So I prepare myself a portrait. I make myself a self-portrait. So it was printed in 1984. So it's a Mokuhanga. It's a woodblock print, water-based printing. And also, it's his print in 1988. Something interesting about this print is actually the images is from a photography that he it was taken in New York, and then he used the age with a photocopier to do the color separation. So he copied the picture with several impressions from lightness to darkness, and then he transferred the image onto the woodblock and carve out and print them. So the use of photocopier offer Wang Keizi a new direction, and also his fellow printmaker in Hong Kong to Tang Guofei. He was born in 1954 studied printmaking also at the University of Hong Kong in 1976. His subject matter is about the urban landscape in Hong Kong, and this is about the Central in the 80s, where you can see the modern high skyscraper and the traditional townhouses placed together with multi-perspective. So the composition stitch up the past, the present, and the future in one composition. There's another artist who was born in the late 50s. His name is Ben Wong. He graduated from the Fine Art Department, the University of Hong Kong, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and then further studied printmaking at the University of Alberta. It's a print that he did in the in the 80s when he was as a student at the University of Hong Kong. The Romance of Imperial Capital series, completed in 1987. He was inspired by the illustration of the classic Chinese novel and studied Mokuhanga technique when he was back then. The color scheme, I think, is telling us a worldly romance about it. So it's now housed in the Hong Kong Heritage Museum collection. Zhang Zhongqu, I guess you might see him walking around on the campus in the conference in this day, and he will have a demonstration tomorrow morning at 10. He claimed himself as a choreographer. He worked with ceramic and a printmaker, and he worked with etching and woodblock printing. He based in Hong Kong, and he said that working on a piece of wood block is no different from working on the Xun paper, on the rice paper. So what he would do is he would draw, he would write, apply choreography on the wood block directly. So you will see him how to do it from zero tomorrow. He will. I can't use the word if it's drawing. It's a drawing or writing, because in choreography he writes on the wood block. But for Mokuhanga, that we will say he write on the wood block or he draw on the wood block. So this is his choreography, and then he carve it. And actually, the title of his demonstration tomorrow is a reverse negative. He doesn't use a barrier to print his print. He uses an etching press. So, so if you want to see his demonstration, then you have to go to the etching studio to see how he uses an etching press to print his water-based woodblock printing. This is the Book of Songs. The Book of Songs is the Asian poetry, the Chinese poetry. His choreography applies ink on the woodblock directly, carve out the negative images, and ink up the plate and run through the press to get the impression. So the print to himself, to the artist, become a narrative, not poem in themselves, but the negative, and he's researching, investigating the negative and the positive space by the really bold brushstroke. So the print was done in 2015, and this is also the most recent work and also the last work that I will introduce here in this afternoon. Just curious, among all artists mentioned before, then they all are, most of them are, he also studied art and design in UK, but now he is a singer of an independent band in Hong Kong. So 12th Zodiac was done in 2 years ago. So it's a series of books, 12 woodblock print. So as you can see, this is the year of cow, ox, the year of tiger, the year of rat, sheep. No, this is cow. This is pig. So he studied graphic design and illustration at Northbrook College in UK. He has been drawing on woodblock. There was a point that he realized his intensive printing, a drawing somehow similar to wood engraving. He then started exploring the media. So the print here, completed in 2015, based on the traditional motif from the Chinese woodblock folk art, but he twisted around. The subject matter is really dark. Actually, 12 Zodiac is a footprint of mostly celebrate the New Year's. But as you can see here, the images are quite dark and observed. Perhaps it's a reflection of the outrageous environment that we are living in. Last but not the least, the modern woodcut movement initiated by Lu Xun in 1931 left legend and legacy to the development of Hong Kong printmaking. The expressive, stroke, powerful expression of woodblock printmaking still be adapted by the activists in the social political movement nowadays. So this is the two print by Chen Fa Yun. It's for the movement of the Queen Pierce series, because actually this for the Star Ferry, and people consider it the symbolic building of the colonial era. So it's now in the warehouse. It has been taken down and in the warehouse, and people are against it. There was a movement in 2007. People tried to keep it, but unfortunately it's now been taken down in the warehouse. So it has been the woodblock printing still been using adapted by the political movement nowadays. With the historical and geographical background, Hong Kong has been identified as a hub and the international city. Artists can gain easily access to a wide range of exposure to absorb the essence of the East and West. Zhang Yi, inspired by the script in the 60s, and Jane Curious by the references from the Chinese folk art recently, are the perfect example to illustrate how Chinese culture rooted among us. As a result, the style, technique, and subject matter of the Hong Kong printmaking are so diverse and unique. What we have just mentioned in the presentation, a glimpse of woodblock printmaking from 1930 to present, is just a brief framework to snapshot the development of Hong Kong printmaking. I believe we have to do more. Further investigation is needed in the future. Thank you. So, if you have any questions, please.
You mentioned most of these prints came from one particular collection, which were once more the two collections.
One is the Hong Kong Museum of Art collection, and the other one is the Hong Kong Heritage Museum collection. So they put their collection online. So if you are interested, you can search it from the web.
Okay. On that idea of museums in Hong Kong collecting prints, of course, Hong Kong is moving forward at the moment with a lot of new cultural projects, and I'm thinking in particular of M+, which is, in train. Do you know what their policy is for printmaking in terms of their whole collection outlook?
As far as I know, that they have their role divided from the Hong Kong Museum of Art and the Hong Kong Heritage Museum and also MPROS.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I know, the Hong Kong Heritage Museum is the key museum to collect the contemporary print, the contemporary Hong Kong print. This is their policy. So, and also the Hong Kong Heritage Museum is the museum to curate print exhibition, the contemporary print exhibition in Hong Kong.
I was just wondering whether M+ maybe has any plan to try and either overlap that or usurp that particular role from those museums or otherwise, or even if they've assigned a place for printmaking in their collection activities.
I think I saw there are some print in their collection, but as far as I know, the acquisition policy is the Heritage Museum took the lead in this particular
Okay,
aspect.
all right.
Not what was the relationship of the artists practicing in Hong Kong or how for your basis in the 30s and 40s when and 50s when woodblock was very prominent in mainland China. That's correct, that's correct. Yeah. How did the Hong Kong artists, the artists practicing in Hong Kong, how did they differentiate themselves from, or did they? That's my question, really.
I don't think they really differentiate themselves as a Hong Kong. There's no clear identification between Hong Kong artists and Chinese artists at that moment of time, because at that day, during just after World War II, and people consider themselves as Chinese rather than Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It's totally different from nowadays.
Yeah.
And because of the war, it's easy to cross the border to get back to their hometown. They consider China, their hometown is still in China.
Yeah.
And it's different from nowadays because I consider my hometown is in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So
it was fluid. What do you
yeah,
say?
yeah. People it's easy to travel across the border, but in the 70s or the 60s after the Cultural Revolution, the gate dropped, and so the communication of the majority stopped. So people try, or people start identifying, and then people get influence from the West, as you see from Jerry Kwan and in the 70s.
Yeah.
So so that's a mixture of it, and then they start forgetting about the because at that time it was the pre-Renaissance, the 70s. It's something really big at that time, and they consider the modern woodcut movement is something outdated. So I think that's the situation.
Thank you.